Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Poland, and as the Chief Executive Officer of Hartford Public Library, it is my great pleasure to welcome you tonight to the first event in a year of programming and discussions that could not be more important to all of us. When my spouse and I bought tickets last year for a trip to Paris this January, we never imagined that we would find ourselves at the very epicenter of a tragedy, and at the moment when the world took stock of just how much individual freedom means. But Jeff and I found ourselves on the streets of Paris a few days after two terrorist gunmen attacked the editorial offices of the weekly magazine Charlie Hebdo and killed nearly a dozen writers, cartoonists, and editors. These people died because they were controversial and because no world religion, Islam being just one of them, was beyond the reach of their satirical pens. And we stood among tens of thousands of stunned and defiant French citizens who protested the attack, which is truly an attack on freedom of expression, and who identified with the murdered journalist by saying, "Je suis Charlie," I am Charlie. Tonight we are saying, in a way, nous sommes Charlie, we are Charlie. With the help of moderator Susan Campbell and our distinguished guest panel, we are going to explore the limits of religious extremism, and we have to remember that in their attack on Charlie Hebdo, the attackers were also killed. What does it mean to live in a society with freedom of worship and freedom of speech? Where do the lines cross? Does censorship ever make sense? When speaking of fundamentalist faiths, is it possible to separate fact from fiction and fiction from fear? What does a free society mean? And can a free society coexist with one where freedoms are limited? I am grateful for your presence here tonight, and I hope in the months going forward you will rejoin us for more discussion and exploration of these vital issues. The library's team of programmers is hard at work planning events and discussions for the next year that will help us see more clearly that what Franklin Delano Roosevelt described as the four freedoms: freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. They have never been more important than they are today. These are not mere theories, but as I learned in Paris this year, matters of life and death. I'm going to turn our evening over to my esteemed friend and former colleague, Susan Campbell. Many of you know Susan from her fearless columns and articles on the pages of the Hartford Current, or you know her from Dating Jesus, a memoir of her fundamentalist girlhood, or for her new book, Tempest Tossed, The Spirit of Isabella Beecher Hooker, recently published by Wesleyan University Press. However you know Susan, you know her voice and her courage, so I'm now going to place this evening in her brave and capable hands. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for being here tonight. Susan?
Thank you. Well, that was an introduction. Thank you. The way we'd like the evening to go is I will introduce the panelists. I am here to learn just as I assume you are. I'll have a couple of questions, I'm sure, but please feel free. This is to be a conversation, so should you have questions once they've given a brief opening statements and I've asked a couple of questions, feel free, weigh in, because it works best if we're all talking. So let me introduce really briefly. Directly to my right is Dr. Saud Anwar, who is the co-chair of the American Muslim Peace Initiative, and he's also mayor of South Windsor. You can ask him why he would do that to himself later. Sitting next to him is Jim Smith. He's president of the Connecticut Council on Freedom of Information, and he's also a retired newspaper editor. And directly to his right is Dr. Reza Mansour. He's founding president of the Muslim Coalition of Connecticut, and he's president of the Islamic Association of Greater Hartford, probably better known as the Berlin Mosque. And all the way down on the end is my old friend, Chris Allen Dussault. He's co-founder of the Hartford Catholic Worker, and he's an adjunct professor of sociology and religion at Central Connecticut State University and also University of Hartford. So those are brief. That doesn't encapsulate these people at all. I'm thrilled to be here, and I didn't even ask first. Would you like to go first? Thank you. We'll listen to Dr. Anwar first.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Hartford Public Library, for giving me an opportunity to speak. So I'll start with the freedom of expression, especially some aspects in Hopefully there's no feedback. So I wanted to start with the freedom of expression, and especially in the current times with what has recently happened. I would divide this issue into two broader components. One are, and from my perspective, something that is non-negotiable, and the part that's negotiable. From a non-negotiable point of view, from freedom of speech, I strongly feel that every individual has a right of freedom of speech and expression, and that's critical, period. No other questions around that. The second part is that this freedom of expression cannot be manipulated by any kind of violence or intimidation. That's again something that's non-negotiable. So these two things should be untouchable from the conversation in my mind for me. Now let's look at the negotiable component. And this is, when we talk about freedom of expression, we are talking about an individual. But let's talk about a society. And how does a society evolve? People have a right to say and speak what they want to, but the society also has a responsibility to listen to what it seems and it would feel to be a priority. Because we need to understand that while people have freedom of expression and speech, when freedom is used to incite hatred, anger, animosity against the others, then the society has to have a responsibility to identify ways of toning those voices down by not listening to them. And the people in our society need to have a responsibility, which includes the elected officials, the leaders, the media, and so on, who need to actually make sure that these voices do not become a mainstream voice. And unfortunately, in the United States nowadays, and in other parts of the world for that matter, we are seeing that the elected officials, the media, are becoming the voice of hatred as well. And that puts a society at a difficult position, and from a sustainable point of view, it creates disharmony amongst communities. And that's why if we as a society and as communities need to identify ways of enhancing the voices which bring the communities together, then we have a society which is a healthier society and does not take away the right of an individual to speak what they want to, and does not take away the right of that individual not to be intimidated by anybody in any shape or form. But at least what we have a right as a society is to say, you can say what you want to, but I'm going to turn that channel off, or I'm going to not listen to you, or I'm not going to buy the newspaper, or I'm not going to read your book, which is going to tell me to hate others. We have to also recognize the association of hate speech with hate crimes. Unfortunately, the hate crimes are on the rise in our community. Hate crimes against Muslims, Jews, LGBT communities, and minorities are on the rise. And the association has been drawn by many people that there is an association between the hate talk, words, which are actually impacting the larger community, and indeed some of the people are using criminal ways of dealing with this. Let's talk about some of the other aspects, other freedoms. When we talk about the freedom of want, we are failing in this end. If you look at the people who are homeless in our communities, are they being identified? Are they being taken care of? I know Susan has done some amazing work recently about that. And in our own communities, the people with food insecurity are on the rise. And this is United States. This is Connecticut in United States. Go outside of our state and then go outside of our country. This freedom of want is actually weakening, is a significant challenge. So that's something that we are far behind as a society as well, and as a world at this time. What about the other freedoms that we are talking about? Again, freedom of worship. All across the world, places of worship are being attacked. And it's usually the minorities who are getting the difficult things. So in a Muslim majority country, there are attacks on the other minorities like Christians and Jewish places of worship. And in the other countries where there are Christian majorities, you see attacks on the mosques and at times synagogues. We are seeing in Europe there's a challenge that's changing the whole tide in that area. So we are failing on that end as well as a larger society, and people are not using their freedom of expression to counter that hatred that's going on. And another important aspect we have to keep in mind is the freedom from fear. Now we have to honestly recognize one more reality. The United States is the #1 exporter and seller of arms in the world, followed by Russia, followed by Germany, followed by France, and followed by United Kingdom. And as much as these arms are being sold across the world, the freedom from fear is nowhere close to an end. It's actually increasing. People live in fear all the time, because of the business of harming, hurting, and sales of arms and ammunition. I want to also just mention one more quote, which I think is of value. That is from, again, President Roosevelt. And I think we should listen to what he was saying. Really need to. He said, "We must scrupulously guard the civil rights and civil liberties of all our citizens, whatever their background. We must remember that any oppression, any injustice, any hatred is a wedge designed to attack our civilization." And another thing that he said, which is actually much relevant every day today, is, "I hate war." I'll stand and stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jim Smith.
How'd you do that? I can't talk without notes. I do want to mention that several years ago I was a judge in the Connecticut Book Awards hosted by this library, and I was on the memoir committee. And we chose first place, best memoir written in Connecticut that year, Dating Jesus by Susan Campbell.
Thank you. Thanks, Dad. Thank you.
How come he dumped you?
You know, I think we need to, we're not just here, we need to remember where we came from. And it just depends how far back you go. So for this conversation, I want to take us back to the epic poem, The Song of Roland, about Charlemagne's defeat at the hands of the Saracens in Spain in 778. And the Song of Roland was written by an anonymous poet maybe a couple hundred years later. But here's his description of some of the battle. In that city there is no pagan now, but he been slain or takes the Christian vow. I mean, it's religious hatred right from the beginning. You must receive the holy Christian faith and yield fee 1/2 the lands of Spain, Roland is saying to the Saracens of Spain. Christians he would them massacre every one. Franks shall be slain. There wasn't France yet. They were Franks. Charlemagne was king of the Franks. Roland responds, pagans are wrong, Christians are right. And they had names for their swords, you know. Roland's sword was Durendal. Durendal I'll lay with my good sword that by my side doth sway. Felon pagans are gathered to their shame. I pledge you now to death, they're doomed today. So the Islamic faith and the French Christian faith have had problems for centuries. Right? So let's jump ahead a couple of centuries to Thomas Jefferson. Okay, and even before the Bill of Rights, even before he wrote the Declaration of Independence, he wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. And in fact, he considers it one of the 3 most important things he's done. Wrote the Declaration of Independence, wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and founded the University of Virginia. That's his 3 most important accomplishments. It's on his tombstone. And so, you know, at the time, 1779, when he started trying to get religious freedom in Virginia, heretics could be burned at the stake. If you weren't of the Anglican religion, your kids could be taken away from you. There was no such thing of religious freedom unless you were Anglican. And so he tried really hard to change that. And it took 6 years, and really James Madison is the guy who put it over the top. But, you know, Jefferson said that his statute for religious freedom was, quote, meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and the Mohammedan, the Hindu and infidel of every denomination. So in 1786, finally there was religious freedom in Virginia. And here's part of its preamble. Well aware the Almighty God hath created the mind free. Legislators, rulers, civil, as well as ecclesiastical, who, being themselves but fallible and uninspired men, unless you're the mayor of South Windsor, have a firm dominion over the faith of others. To compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves is sinful and tyrannical. That's the preamble to the first law on religious freedoms in the American colonies. And then it wasn't that much longer that we jumped ahead to the Bill of Rights, and you know Jefferson is our envoy in Paris, and Madison's his guy getting the Bill of Rights through in Philadelphia. And Jefferson writes to him to remind him to get freedom of the press. The federal government will never restrain the presses from printing anything they please. So, you know, make sure freedom of the press is in there. Now, it wasn't not much longer after that, and after Washington became president, and then Adams, and there was a Federalist Party and a Jeffersonian Party, the Republican Party at the time. And they were bitter rivals. And the press at the time were either Federalist or Republican. And one Republican one reporter for a Federalist paper after Jefferson was elected president was the first to break the story that Tom was sleeping with a slave. And so we have the Sally Hemings story. So right from the very beginning, the free press was going right after the guy who said there's got to be a free press. Right? You know, back to religion, so Jefferson is president, and in 1802, the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, wrote to him about their religious freedom. So we knew that Baptists were having trouble in Connecticut, even in 1802, and you know that's where Jefferson came up with the oft-quoted phrase, "There's a wall of separation between government and religion." Once again, the man for freedom over constraint. And I think I'll just end with. I like the four freedoms we're discussing. And I think they, in '49 they became part of the UN Charter, and if a nation joins the UN, they have to sign off on the four freedoms, and they're cool. But I like the five freedoms better. Right? Our five freedoms: the First Amendment, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of peaceable assembly, and the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. That's the First Amendment. It's insoluble. The press is free. Our speech is free. You can worship any God you want. We can gather here tonight. It's our right to gather here tonight as long as we remain peaceable. And we can write to the government and tell them to get off our backs. That is what the Founding Fathers made as our First Amendment. Right? Well, thanks.
And we'll move to Dr. Riza-Mansour.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to all of you for coming today. And good evening to all of you, and God's peace be with you all. So when we speak about the four freedoms that President Roosevelt spoke about, we must also understand the context of his speech and the time when he was saying it, which was when Europe was at war and it was a speech directed to the need to end our isolation and promote international involvement based on our values. And I would like to quote from President Roosevelt during that speech, because it's a lot more than the 4 freedoms as sound bites. He said, "In the future days which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world." So out of these very lofty goals, which would make our world a wonderful place, which will take us way too long to discuss here, I will focus on freedom of speech for today's discussion, understanding that taking one part out of 4 in isolation can be problematic. But the need to preserve freedom of speech, as was said earlier, is a value that we have come to expect as a basic freedom, which is part of our Bill of Rights. Thomas Jefferson and our founding fathers believed that minimizing the limits on what people were free to say was essential for liberal democracy to thrive. The marketplace of ideas belief holds that the truth and good public policy arise from competition of widely varying ideas freely shared in public discourse. The founders also thought that open exchanges of ideas would encourage tolerance among people. I see this in the very healthy interfaith dialogue that we have in this country, and particularly in this area, between people of all faith communities. The open exchange of beliefs and ideas clarifies our differences, but doesn't exaggerate our differences, as opposed to what happens so often in media when one group is absent, and so the speech is alien from that group that's absent. And often this happens not just in the media, but also in political circles when discussing, in particular, Muslims and Islam, and in particular in conservative circles. The freedom of speech clause was supposed to help open exchange of ideas, to encourage tolerance of people with different views, not an excuse, however, to insult those who you don't know or dislike. I believe that that is in fact an abuse of the value that this principle is supposed to stand for. So how about Charlie Hebdo and the murders that happened? Let me tell you quite categorically that there is absolutely no justification for this vigilante type murder in Islam. Is there something in Islam that shows you that? And the examples are numerous, where Islam has no problem with freedom of speech. But I'd like to give you 2 short examples so that you understand the dynamics of how the Prophet went about educating people on the need for this. One of those well-known incidents is when there was a group of people walking past the Prophet, and they said, "Assalamu alaikum," to the Prophet. Now, this may sound like the Islamic greeting, "Assalamu alaikum," which means peace be with you, but it actually meant death to you. And this was said right to the Prophet's face in a deliberate attempt to insult the Prophet. His wife, Aisha, who was with him, responded right away, saying, "May death be upon you, and also the curse of God be with you." And the Prophet immediately held her hand and said, "Aisha, this is not the way we behave." She remonstrated, saying, "Did you hear what they said?" And he replied, "Did you hear what I say? Be gentle and calm, for God loves calmness in all affairs." And in another saying, he said, "God loves the patient and Satan loves the impulsive," showing that your tone and the way you address issues should be measured. Did he in fact punish them as he was now state in Medina, and this happened in Medina, and he could have done it. In fact, the people around him asked him whether they could punish these people who had deliberately taunted him, and he said, the maximum you may do if somebody insults you is to say, and to you. End of story. On another occasion, also in Medina, Abu Bakr, one of the Prophet's closest companions, was being insulted by a man, and Abu Bakr was one of the calmest people and did not respond. However, after this man said something particularly hurtful to Abu Bakr did respond, at which point the Prophet stood up and walked out. Abu Bakr followed the Prophet and said, it's not fair. When he insulted me, you were smiling. And when I replied to his hurtful comment, you got upset and left. The Prophet replied, O Abu Bakr, what you did not see is that when that man insulted you, the angels were defending you. And I smiled at their defense of you. And when you got upset, the angels left. And when the angels leave, the messenger of God leaves also. This is a lesson very much like the other great messenger of Islam, Jesus, may peace be upon him, when he taught us and advocated the turning of the cheek. Islam is not uniquely intolerant of freedom of speech in any way, but we must be able to balance our freedoms with our responsibilities. As Saud said, without some controls, you can see what a slippery slope this is. Is this freedom of speech intended to be freedom to insult, to incite, freedom to threaten? The classic example is a person yelling fire in a crowded theater. Well, you are free to do that, but there are consequences to such actions, such as, in that case, being arrested and put in jail. But in a world where we don't have any responsibilities for what we say, and when we insult each other, the consequences can be devastating. As the Pope said, if you insult my mother, I may punch you. And what he has demonstrated, or what he was demonstrating in that, is that despite religion, despite religious restraints, human beings are human and may react. And an insult may have a profound consequence despite religion. There is no justification for killing from any religious perspective, especially Islam, but human beings are reactionary. Islam, in fact, holds us as believers to a higher moral standard. In the Quran, God says, and do not insult those they invoke other than God, lest they insult God in enmity without knowledge. Thus have we made pleasing to every community their deeds. Then to their Lord is their return, and he will inform them about what they used to do. This is clearly meant to restrain the true believers from reacting and insulting each other. Leave God to judge between those who have differences and be the better person. And that is what religion teaches us. So should this responsibility be legislated? I don't believe we should, nor do I believe we can. It must come from an ethical and moral place that cannot be legislated. But as a nation, we need to find this ethical and moral place. And I thank you for coming to be part of this discussion. God's peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Chris Allen, do so.
Well, two things. I've reached that point in life where I can't see my writing if I don't have glasses on, but that means I can't see you, which is maybe a good thing. And the other thing is, despite living in Hartford for about 25 years now, I'm from Boston. And so, you remember during Sandy, when the mayor of New York was speaking, there was a translator for sign language. I don't know, maybe Susan, you can translate for...
I speak Massachusetts. I can do this.
I'm a little bit intimidated being the last one to speak because I don't think I'm as smart as the rest of you guys, and you said a couple of things I wanted to say. But with apologies to Matt Poland, I'm not sure I'm Charlie Hebdo. I think if I were to identify myself, rather than standing with Charlie Hebdo, I haven't seen their publication, by the way. I've been reading the accounts, and from what I understand, they sort of make it a practice to publish provocative cartoons and satire, not just against Muslims, against Christians as well, although apparently less so these days. I guess if I were to say, if I'm somebody, I might say I'm Mustafa Fartus, an Iraqi boy that I know who was badly wounded by an American bomb. If I'm going to stand with somebody, I don't think I'm going to stand at people in the center of a society with privilege, castigating people on the margins of a society. I think I'd rather stand on the margins of society with the people that are being castigated. And the world looks different when you're on the margins. This talk of freedom and holding up Jefferson as a paragon of freedom, and I think that the expression used was that he valued freedom over constraint. I think his understanding of freedom looked differently from the perspective of the 300 people he owned. Maybe they thought what he was talking about as freedom was something different because they didn't have it. Does freedom look different when you're standing on the margins of society, when you are among the persecuted, the dispossessed, the weak, the hated, the despised?
Women, too. Jefferson didn't want women to vote.
Well, precisely, right? It wasn't accidental that all men are created equal. It's so first of all, we have to, I'm going to ask questions more than make statements, I think. So who defines freedom? It seems freedom is defined by those at the center, by those on top. Freedom is defined by the powerful and the privileged. And does that mean that freedom tends to be defined in such a way that reinforces their status and their power in an unjust status quo? Would freedom perhaps be defined differently? Or would different facets of freedom be differently emphasized if those in the margins of society had more of a say, or even had a say, if they were at least listened to? This whole idea of freedom from fear. Years back, Ramsey Clark, a former Attorney General, I was at a gathering with him, and he was sharing a story of his time with Dr. King during the Civil Rights days. And he recounted asking Dr. King once if he was ever afraid, right? And Dr. King had good reason to be afraid. And the way the Attorney General remembers it is Dr. King said to him, we must learn not to fear, because what we fear, we will hate. And what we hate, we will kill. So perhaps, we could begin to de-escalate some of the tensions in our society and our world community if we began to work on that whole issue of fear. And what do the people on the margins of society have to fear? The news media, apologies, I don't mean so much the print media as much as I would say the broadcast media, really manipulates us and wants us to be afraid, right? And when we're afraid, we can be controlled. We can be, bullied into going along with just about anything when we're afraid. But really, what do we have to be afraid of, right? There was we're all whipped up into a frenzy last decade about terrorism. More Americans died of air pollution in the last decade than have ever died of terrorism. What are we afraid of, right? Maybe we need to go again to those on the margins of society. I'm going to argue that those of us that don't live on the margins of society, those of us in the center of society, we frankly have a moral obligation to pick ourselves up and firmly plant ourselves on the margins of society, not to rescue or to heal, but to listen and to learn. And maybe we can hear from them what they fear, which brings me to this idea of freedom from want. My goodness, the resources of this world of ours are so abundant and have been so grossly exploited by those in the center and those in power to leave so many on the margins in want. And what sort of discussions might we be having if the temperature in the room was lowered because bellies were filled, because homes were secure and provided for everybody, because there was a seat in a quality classroom for every child and health care for every person who is ill and in need. Right? If we diverted some of those resources from creating fear to eradicating want, then maybe folks wouldn't be as up in arms about things that are offensive, but perhaps not life-threatening. You know, this idea of the cartoons being provocative, I'm all for free speech. I don't think it should be regulated out of existence. I may find them distasteful, but I'm not here to argue that they should be made illegal. But there is precedent for it, right? Speech is regulated to protect the vulnerable. This was just raised recently when a new edition of Mein Kampf is being published in Germany. And it opened up a debate in Germany about that because it was hate speech and it was dangerous speech, and we needed to protect a vulnerable segment of society from the consequences of that speech being made available once again. So, you know, this whole idea of freedom, we're explicit about our freedoms. And I'm not sure we're even implicit about our responsibilities. What are our responsibilities to each other, particularly to those in the margin? One last thought. When I was asked to join folks tonight, two images came to my mind, or two people came to my mind. One was Robert Mapplethorpe in his piece of art, Piss Christ. I find it offensive. I wouldn't say it's illegal. He shouldn't have been allowed to do it. I find it offensive, but I'm not threatened by it, and perhaps I'm not threatened by it because Christians aren't a persecuted minority. Christians aren't on the margins of this society, and so maybe that is muting my reaction to it. He was being provocative. Maybe we should ask why and what he was being provocative about. But then the other one I think of is maybe some of you know this fellow. I'm embarrassed to say I know this fellow, and I'm embarrassed to admit publicly that at times he makes me laugh out loud, but I'm thinking of Daniel Tosh. Some of his stuff is awful and terribly offensive and mean. It's not funny, it's just mean. And some of his stuff makes me laugh out loud. And is he being provocative? Yes. Is he being provocative for a reason? Is he serving a purpose with his provocation? And should that matter? Does being provocative for a higher goal justify it? Right? That was the argument about Lenny Bruce, right? He wasn't vulgar because he was provoking folks with an agenda in mind, right? To take the sting away from some words, to provoke us to challenge our assumptions and our prejudices. So, is there a value in provocation? And if there is a value, does it have to be readily identified to us in order for us to accept it? Or should we accept and see value in provocation, without any visible higher purpose? I don't know. Maybe I'm not making any sense here, but just some questions I have. I'm really looking forward to hearing from folks. And my 2 cents worth, I'm begging the women in the audience to not be dominated by the men when they all shoot up their hands to speak first. This is a panel of 4 men moderated by a woman, and I really hope that women get equal say this evening.
You better keep us in line.
Oh, they will. Thank you, Chris, very much. I just had one question. I hope you're thinking up some for yourself, but I was familiar with Charlie Hebdo somewhat, and it had basically not a lot of readership. It was considered fringe. It was Mad Magazine on crack, and it was offensive to women as well. And it was not a publication I would ever look at, and I looked at it for a class and thought, okay, well, I'll never read that again. In the same way, I am not a fan of Hustler magazine at all, and yet the publisher is a bastion of First Amendment rights. I am so uncomfortable with that. So where do we talk about freedom of speech, but you're right, we do have restrictions. Freedom, when is it provocative and when is it hate speech, and who gets to decide? I think that was one of your questions. At what point do we say, not that?
Well,
go ahead.
We have roadmaps. Let me just say that two of my friends up here, one said that the media is the voice of hatred, and another said that the media wants us all to be afraid. I want you to know that I disagree with both of those. The media in America, with all of its faults, what it does is try to inform us so that we can make the right decisions in democracy. Also, shouting fire in a theater is okay to do. In 1969, the Supreme Court overturned the 1927 decision that said you can't yell fire in a theater. You can yell fire in a theater. Okay? There's all kinds of room for provocative discussion and treatises in this country because of the First Amendment. I would not want to censor Mein Kampf. I would want to try to understand it so I could debate it down. But here's just, can I do a couple quick Supreme Court decisions? This is Louis Brandeis in 1926. In a democracy, public discussion is a political duty. Freedom to think as you will and to speak as you think are means indispensable to the discovery and spread of political truth. Without free speech and assembly, discussion would be futile. Those who won our independence by revolution valued liberty both as an end and as a means. They believed liberty to be the secret of happiness and courage to be the secret of liberty. They recognized the greatest menace to freedom is an inert people. The greatest menace to stable government is repression. Fear of serious injury alone cannot justify oppression of free speech and assembly. Men feared witches and burnt women. It is the function of free speech to free men from the bondage of irrational fears. Those were, Brandeis wrote those back in the 1920s, and then just quickly, we can jump up to New York Times Company versus Sullivan, a Southern law enforcement chief who sued the Times for an inaccurate ad about civil rights marches down there. And the Supreme Court ruled in 1964 unanimously. Those who won our independence believe that public discussion is a political duty, and that this should be a fundamental principle of the American government. They recognize the risks to which all human institutions are subject, but they knew that order cannot be secured merely through fear of punishment for its infraction. It is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination, that fear breeds repression, that repression breeds hate, that hate menaces stable government. The path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely supposed grievances and proposed remedies. The profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open, and it may well include vehement, caustic, and sometimes unpleasantly sharp attacks. The Supreme Court says we can say almost anything we want.
And the media doesn't. Your defense of your profession, it's honorable. However, I think it's misplaced. The American media completely fell down on the job in the lead up to the so-called Second Gulf War. It was really a continuation of the First Gulf War. But they bought hook, line, and sinker a bunch of lies. And frankly, I think they've yet to do a sufficient mea culpa to the people whose lives were lost because they presented those lies. On a larger point about the media...
The New York Times fired the reporter who covered the war.
Great. still had the war.
Yeah, and
The people aren't coming back.
apologized for missing the story.
And many Americans still believe Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11 because the media has repeated lies. The media, I'm all for a robust media. We need the media. We need our newspapers. I don't think we need Fox News, but we need our newspapers. We need Bill Moyer. We need Frontline. We need that sort of journalism. A broader question I have about the media, and it goes back to what I was asking about people on the margins. The media presents a perspective, and frankly, there are very few perspectives presented by the media. I think worldwide, something like 90% of major media outlets are controlled by either 12 corporations or countries. That's a very limited number of perspectives that are being offered. Where are they choosing to focus? If you look at the media as a camera or as a telescope even, where are they choosing to point that telescope? Which stories are they choosing to highlight? Are they telling us what's outside the scope of what they're seeing in the lens? And then the media, they mediate. How are they mediating that information? How are they explaining it? Are they giving us proximate explanations, or are they giving us ultimate explanations? Is the point of view from black folks, from poor folks, from women, from people in other countries? Are those perspectives as adequately represented in the media as the perspective of the dominant groups in our society?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Okay, hang on.
Let me, just in America, the strength of the American press is its diversity. We have everything from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal, from MSNBC to Fox News, and everything in between. We have the Atlantic and Harper's and Mother Jones and the New Republic and a gazillion new websites. And some media say they come from a particular political point of view, and we know that point of view. Right? We know the National Review is a conservative magazine. Okay? We know that Mother Jones is a liberal magazine. If you look at all of the media, and the First Amendment protects all of the media, it presents every possible, it covers every possible problem before the American people.
Could I just interject with something here? We're talking about the media, and all branches of the media, but the reality is that it's that boob tube that sits in front of us 24/7 now. An accident occurred with me last year. I had a problem with my cable company, and they said I wasn't getting good pixelation. I went to my TV repair guy, and he said there was nothing wrong with the TV, so I shut it down. I no longer have cable television. Wow, what a wonderful world out there. I now go on to my iPad at any time I want and open up the Washington Post or any variety of publications, and I get far more breadth of, because that media, I'm restricting it to this thing that repeats and repeats and captivates us 24/7. And I can see how people are manipulated by major events that are taking place in the world, because when something happens like the airliner or somebody gets lost, there's paranoia all around me. I understand where it's coming from, this thing that glares at us in our homes, but I don't receive it anymore, and I'm much better off for it. So in respect to the idea of freedom, we're living in a clash of cultures that's been exacerbated by the Bush regimes that have really, if there's an original sin to this whole thing, it's both Bush number one and Bush number two kicking over the hornet's nest and turning the Middle East into a sting that has now come back for us to kick it back, and it's just so sorrowful that we're going through this period which we did not have to go through. So in other words, we've kicked over the hornet's nest, and we've made the monsters now that we have to slay.
Okay, let's let Dr. Anwar, you
Sure.
wrote a note down that you wanted to say something.
Sure.
Thank you, Ben.
Actually, with respect to the media, let's divide them into print media and broadcast journalism. And in the broadcast journalism is a different animal, if you will. And that's, you're actually using sound bites. And I'll share some examples with you. First of all, somebody did a study and they looked at the boards that are governing and overseeing some of these different larger media companies. It turns out in the previous study there were some 120 or so people who were part of the governing the entire total number of US medias. And then the overlap of these individuals with military companies, military industrial complex, was very significant. And one of the large media companies back in the first Gulf War was owned majority share by a company that was making missiles and technology, and they were showing their missiles and technology throughout the reporting of the Gulf War. So it was actually an advertisement in the form of media. The amazing thing is, and I read the media in entire world, not entire world, majority of the other countries. The only difference is that majority of the people in other parts of the world, when they listen to their own media, they are smiling and laughing and say, oh, they're lying. The only thing in America, we actually all believe it. Many of us believe that we have it and think who's making the money from various different things and how they're making the money, and that'll answer some of the questions why things happen. I'll share a personal example. I was asked to speak at one of these cable channels, and they said, we want to interview you. I said, sure, okay. They said, but we want to ask you some questions, all right? Well, I can come and speak to you. I said, no, we want to first send you these questions in written, and we want you to write down those answers. And these were about the current issues and challenges. And I wrote back the answers, which to me are from my experience as an individual who's an American, who's of Muslim faith, and looks at the world and what's going on by traveling in different parts of the world. I wrote those answers, and I said, I'm experienced to answer this question. So when the time comes to answer those questions, they said, no, sorry, we won't be able to have you there. And instead of me, they have another person who is brown-skinned, but not a Muslim, but has a beard, and looks like a Muslim, and he actually is not a Muslim, and they put him, and he speaks junk. I'm sorry. He speaks all sorts of things which are not in the best interest of America and the policies that they're proposing. And I said, okay, I'm going to go to and make my own YouTube video on this. Because that's all I have, that's all I can do right now, because the story that is being created out there, my story is going to make lives better, but it's going to make some rich people lose money. And they're too powerful right now, so I just have my little YouTube, and I'll try to make that.
I have a comment to add as well. I agree that media should inform people. But we too, as a Muslim, and I'll give you an example, broadcast media has been a huge problem. They love sensationalism, and therefore what sells is sensationalism. So when you invite them to come for a vigil, interfaith dialogue, this is not newsworthy, we don't have somebody covering that particular place at that particular time. There's plenty of examples. The classic example is since 2001, November, the Times Journal did a favorability questionnaire, and they found that 17% of Americans fear Islam, have an unfavorable view of Islam. Now that is after the 9/11 massacre, and you can imagine that number, how it's a large number, but it should be getting better. Now the number is 45%. Around 150 million people view Islam as a problem. Now you may ask, why is that? And the reason is sensational media shows, okay, they're talking about Sharia, okay, which are the guidelines that Muslims use to pray, to fast. All of these ethical and moral guidelines come from our two sources, the Quran and the sayings and teachings of the prophets. That's Sharia. But they will show you a woman being stoned to death by some vigilantes in Afghanistan, and it's how they portray it, it's how they put it across. And so we realize that we've gone from 17% to 45% because of people that they interview. One of the recent people that they interviewed was this guy, Stephen Emerson. He's been coming on since 2001, and it's a huge problem for Muslims. Well, he said that Birmingham is a no-go zone for non-Muslims because Birmingham is a Muslim city. It happens to be about 20% Muslim, and when the British Prime Minister was questioned on him, he said, this is an idiot. Okay, and it's then that he apologized, not because he hurt the Muslims' feelings by lying to them, and when Muslims speak out, he doesn't care. And this guy has been interviewed repeatedly on Fox News, okay? And so you can see the media slant. It's on sensationalism, it's on what, what they want heard, and the moderate voice doesn't sell. And then they ask, and where is the moderate voice? It's a catch-22. We are trapped in this catch-22 where the moderate voice can't say anything, and the extremes are the only voices, the extreme voices that are being heard. So it's problematic.
Sorry, we were fighting over the mic. Actually trying to give it away, I swear.
It just seems that where the money and the power want to be, the people who have the most money and the most power, they find a way to set people against each other so that they can reap the rewards for themselves. If they have no trouble in publishing what they want in the media, then people are forced to listen to it. I mean, the mainstream media, the rest of us don't look at that, but it's just the money and the power and who has the money and the power to fool everybody else. And they don't care how they get their rewards. They don't care how many children and women are thrown underneath the military machine. They're talking about that man who was burned to death in a cage. I'd like to wonder know how many people would like to go and watch the little women and children dancing around as they burn to death from the things that we drop on them. It's just, there's no justice.
Go ahead. Careful now.
Yeah. So we're here talking about a Paris magazine printing offensive cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and whether that's appropriate to do or not. And in France, it's appropriate to do. And in America, it's appropriate to do. Wherever there is a free press, it's appropriate to have a marketplace of ideas.
Appropriate or allowed?
Well, either.
No, I don't mean that mean.
No, it's
Legal, not moral.
There you
well,
go.
no, that's, you see, that's, it puzzles me that we're here criticizing a free press.
A press that's free to ignore so much.
I don't know that. I don't know that they're
in a free society. Here is Justice Rehnquist, and when Larry Flint, the publisher of Hustler magazine, ran a parody of
Jerry Falwell.
Jerry Falwell, the Christian fundamentalist minister, having sex with his mother in an outhouse.
It was a joke. He didn't really.
It was mean. It was offensive. But the First Amendment allows us to do that. And here's Rehnquist. Despite their sometimes caustic nature, from the early cartoon portraying George Washington as an ass, down to the present-day graphic depictions and satirical cartoons, have played a prominent role in public and political debate. Nast's castigation of the Tweed Ring, Walt McDougall's characterization of presidential candidate James G. Blaine's banquet with the millionaires at Delmonico's, Lincoln's tall, gangling posture, Teddy Roosevelt's glasses and teeth, Franklin Roosevelt's jutting jaw and cigarette holder have been memorialized by political cartoons with an effect that could not be obtained by the photographer or the writer or the portrait artist. Hustler is at best a distant cousin of the political cartoons described above. But the fact that society may find speech offensive is not sufficient reason for suppressing it. Indeed, if it is the speaker's opinion that gives offense, that consequence is a reason for according it constitutional protection. For it is the central tenet of the First Amendment that the government must remain neutral in the marketplace of ideas. We can draw these things. We can report these things. We can say these things, and the government cannot stop us, and it should be something that we cherish.
It's great that we can do those things, that we can cherish those things. But what's more offensive to me than the cartoons are all of the perspectives and all of the stories that aren't represented and told and mediated by that broad spectrum represented by the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. Because that encompasses so much, right? The Wall Street Journal to the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post. My goodness, how limited of a viewpoint is contained within those two poles. What I find offensive of all the stories locally, how much press have we given to this baseball stadium while the school on my street's contaminated with PCBs? But nobody cares about the school contaminated by PCBs because poor black and brown children go to that school. And middle class and wealthy white folks are going to go to the baseball stadium. And so we're catering to those interests, and that's the perspective that dominates the coverage. Not the perspective of the kids back in my neighborhood, right? These stories. Why do I even know the name Kardashian? My God. All right? The media, I'm sorry, and I'll again qualify this by saying the broadcast media in large, the print media is somewhat better, but the broadcast media is filled with distractions that distract us from the really meaningful things in life that we should be worried about, like 3 million Americans that are homeless, like spending half of our discretionary budget on the military. Those are the things that need to be on 24-hour news loops.
You know, the issue, I think all four of us said, that the issue is not the legality of the media saying things that are unfavorable. The issue is, do you pick on a minority and make them look bad? I mean, we've matured to the level that we no longer use the N-word. We think it's morally and ethically reprehensible to use insulting terms of others who are minorities and you may not like or you may not know enough about, but it's moral. We're talking morals and we're talking ethics and we're talking responsibilities. We're not talking legality here. We've got to get as a nation to that moral, ethical place where we are responsible as citizens, not just, you know, insulting each other. Politicians, okay, you know, they are in the public domain. You're allowed to, you know, ask questions about them. And having satirical cartoons about politicians, okay, but a minority that's being marginalized and picked on, to have cartoons insulting them and their, you know, their faith is something that's morally and ethically, I think, irresponsible and reprehensible.
A style sheet for society.
Yeah.
I'd like to get your opinions about some other kind of, not the media so much stepping in on free speech, but elected officials. And here's a couple of examples. Today, we learned that the Trumbull Public Library was told to remove from its walls a painting that depicted two women, just their heads, Margaret Sanger next to Mother Teresa. And the esteemed order of the Daughters of Charity, or whatever order she belonged to, said that her image was, using her image was an infringement of her image, much like you would do with Coca-Cola or IBM, you know, that they owned her image, and that this was an affront to using her image. So the first selectman ordered that the painting be removed, and the librarian said, while this is a matter of First Amendment, I understand the first selectman's concern. This is the second time in Connecticut in recent times when a library, the last one, Enfield, ordered by the mayor or whoever runs the council there to stop showing movies that poked fun at the healthcare industry. You might remember this. Sicko was the film, and the librarian was ordered to stop showing movies that make fun of the government. So in your public institutions, public libraries, these are bastions of First Amendment rights, right? You can read whatever you want. We'll get you whatever book you want if we don't have it. And yet politicians are stepping into public places and saying, we are going to set the standard for the culture in this town by telling you there are things you can't do and can't read and can't see. And I think is equally dangerous and almost a little bit more insidious than talking about Fox News or about NBC, because this is happening in your communities every day. So the sort of freedom of speech, freedom of expression is occurring right here in Hartford and in all the suburbs and all those places. And it's not all writ large with Charlie Hebdo. That's what we want the conversation to create. But it's really about, in the microcosm that we live in, the local area, we're doing this all the time. And people are creating what free speech is based on their own opinion. And I think for the Catholic Church to do this thing in Trumbull and to treat her like she was Mother Teresa, God love her, she's a saint, but on the other side of the coin, she's not Elvis Presley. And owning her image and saying that you can't paint her on a painting without paying some royalty to the Catholic order is really pushing it a little bit.
That's great to bring up because it happened yesterday. When I was executive editor of the Record Journal in Meriden, a local artist painted religious pictures of Jesus and several others. And the library was ordered to take the pictures of Jesus down, but the ones of Noah and David and Goliath and others could stay up. The artist took them all down. In Trumbull, actually, I saw the painting. It's more than just saying her and Mother Teresa. It is a painting of luminary women of the 20th century. There's probably 20 of them in the painting. The Catholic Church objected to Mother Teresa being thrown in with women who approve of abortion.
Had sex.
Yeah.
How do we feel about market censorship? If I don't like The Hustler, and I don't buy it. If I don't like Charlie Hebdo, I don't buy it. In a perfect world, when something said that's community standards offensive, we would ring that offensive thing and love them to death, I guess, or shout at them or something. But if we see something that we don't like, we don't believe in censorship, but if we see something we don't like, we take our money elsewhere. If you don't like a particular television station, don't watch it. And let their sponsors know, I'm not buying your product because you advertise on that station or in that publication. Is that a good compromise between, obviously we don't want the government weighing in, but we also don't want this nonsense, some of it.
We cannot let the first selectman of Trumbull tell us what paintings we can see. Right? You probably can't see that very well, but Rudy Giuliani tried to get this painting of the Virgin Mary kicked out of the Brooklyn Museum. All right? No, you can't see this painting. I'm sorry. It offends me. Well, the museum took him to court, and guess who won? The mayor can't censor art in the United States of America. We can see the paintings, any painting we want to see.
Well, my golden rule is I do my own people. I mean, and if my people can't handle this, which are, well, formally Roman Catholics, Jews, and Italians. But I'll laugh like hell when somebody else is doing his people, and I don't particularly feel guilty. And I'm not talking about very...
What do you mean you can make fun of your own kind?
Well, I feel comfortable making fun of my own kind, sure. I was doing a mafia type of impressions with this Italian guy for a while that I've known. And one day he said, "Why are you insulting Italians?" I said, "I'm sorry. You didn't know I was Italian?" My last name is Katz, and he didn't realize. So I changed to speaking Italian to him, and he felt better. But, I mean, will I not laugh at Chris Rock but I would never touch any of his material.
You wouldn't say it
So,
yourself.
I mean, I think that's where, you know, I did a slight spoof on not incorporating Islam, but I didn't insult the Muslim faith. But I spoofed ISIL, and I don't think that I was doing anything that bad. But anyways, the point is that, you know, we have our different segments, different peoples doing their own, and that's personally my golden rule, is that I can't step outside of the groups that I feel identified with, either through blood or culture. When I was living in Europe, I mostly castigated Americans, and living back here, I still do. So those are my people.
Can I jump in about a couple of things? So there are 2-3 things that have been out there. I just want to put my perspective on them quickly. One thing about the elected officials having an influence in trying to control what goes in the library, that's a very slippery slope, and I agree with you, and it should be avoided and protected. And if that is happening, then people need in the community to stand up and speak about it. The other thing that the elected officials are doing, thankfully, not in this part of the country, but in Texas, they're changing the textbooks of our children, the next generation. Now, how dangerous is that? Because now the past is being changed because it's going to be written in a specific manner. And that's a very slippery slope, and it's something that should have an alert written all over the entire hearts and minds of each and every individual. With respect to the market pressures, I think the market pressures would be great, except the same people are the ones who are marketing it as well. And in the general terms, the people, our society has become so focused on short-term answers. We are not going deeper to understand the issues. We want an answer right now. To the point, think about it, when somebody new comes in a company or something, you say, how is this person? You don't want to make your own opinions any longer. You don't want to interact with that individual and make your own opinions. You want somebody else's opinion to dictate how you're going to feel about that individual. And as a society, if we stop investing in our own opinions and own understanding, others will make those opinions and understanding, and that's going to be a slippery, dangerous slope that we are moving towards. Stop here. I know there are people.
Can I just say quickly, Susan? God bless the libraries and protect, you know, the right to show artwork and to have any type of literature available. And I'm hoping that the libraries go even further. And I know that, and I think this library was involved in standing up to the federal government with the Patriot Act and turning over who was checking out what books, because that is an assault on our freedoms and our freedom of intellect and inquiry. Regarding the marketplace and the media, the broadcast media is distinct, because the airwaves are public airwaves. Those are our airwaves, right? You know, they're licensed to the different carriers, but those are your airwaves. They're our airwaves, and so they should be serving the public good. And I think if they're being used for something that undermines the public good, then the public should have a say about that and call that to order.
FCC.gov, you can comment on anything. And when station renewal license or station license renewals come up, they look at those. Absolutely. Remember Justin Timberlake opened up her bra? Janet Jackson?
It's not portrayed that way. It's portrayed that she did it. They never even mentioned Justin.
See, and I saw it, and I remember his hand went up,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
okay.
And also, what I like to bring up also is the fact that media can't be suppressed, because one example I think of is when I believe it was Prince William, when I forget her name, his wife, how she had some photos that came out that she was, you know, taking swimming or something like that. Well, photos that they didn't want out in the public like that, they suppressed that. That was squashed. But, you know, you hear about all types of allegations about Bill Cosby coming out everywhere. It's all over the media. It's like that's more important than more important issues. So I do see that some stories can be suppressed and some stories are spread all over the world. And another problem I have with, you know, things like you're talking about, like the Hebdo cartoon satire thing, is that cartoons can actually reach children, because they can't distinguish between satire and SpongeBob or something like that. So it's not like explicit XXX material where there's like you have to press a button and say I'm 18 in order to view this. any person can view it because there's no restrictions on it. And especially talking about cable. If you have cable in your house, a lot of parents, they're in their room and the kids are in this room and they're watching whatever's on TV. So they can come across South Park or Adult Swim and they look at it and it's a cartoon. So they're sitting there and they're watching it and it's influencing them. So that's the problem with a lot of these images, that they subconsciously influence us. So we have to be very careful about what type of images that we have on our televisions and what we allow. And just like you said, freedom is not free. Just because it's in a law doesn't mean that it's okay. You have to have controls over everything. You have to have order. You can't just have all kinds of stuff in the news and stuff like that, because it's dangerous. Words are dangerous, thoughts are dangerous, ideas are dangerous, and images are dangerous also. So they have to be controlled.
That's interesting. Can we, both of you have had your hand up. Do you mind? Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a little bit more of a point when you brought up the idea of, I believe you used the word boycott. You mentioned...
I didn't, but I should have.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to legally change my middle name to Boycott. You mentioned Hustler. Daniel Tosh was mentioned. First, I do think that we have the responsibility to tell certain sources, I don't approve, I will not listen to you, or I will not read you, or I will not buy your product, or I will not... You get what I'm saying. We need to let them know. We need to withdraw our support. We also need to tell them, I'm going to tell other people how I feel and encourage them to do the same. I think that part of the problem, so many of the problems that we're facing here and probably around the world, is that we have all of these wonderfully strong, impassioned opinions. We don't do anything about it. We need to be talking to our neighbors and to our friends and to our family members who disagree with us and say, this is how I feel, this is why I feel this way, and I'm going to do everything that I can to influence you in that direction. But for heaven's sakes, we need to let what is out there be out there, because once we start putting controls on what we can see or hear or say or do, let's all get out our copies of 1984 and just carry them around.
If you would pass the microphone back. Thank you very much. Something you said, Dr. Anwar, about forming your own opinion. We rely on others to tell us, not just the new guy in the office, but so what do I think about this? And I don't know how we got there. Is it the internet?
I think the internet isn't helping at all.
Okay.
It's adding to the problem, but I think as our lives have become so busy, we want an answer to solutions very simply. And the broadcast journalism, actually, if you look at it, they want to give an emotional response and then give an opinion and try to touch the hearts and minds of individuals in a way to change their opinion. And it's very well organized. Well, on the other hand, in the print, you actually have to make a case and then have a detailed argument. But it takes a longer time to see that, as opposed to just listening to one sound bite and saying, okay, this is the solution. Everybody wants it to be simple. And then that's human nature, and people are actually using that human nature weakness, if you will, to try and manipulate policies and actions of individuals. Look at it from the other way. The extremists, the murderers who actually murdered people, they had a soundbite too. And they were influenced by a soundbite. And then that soundbite allowed them to do is to kill people. And then that's very dangerous. So this is a slippery slope when everybody starts to make decisions based on a few soundbites. It's a very slippery slope, and then we are thankfully way ahead of that curve, but lower down in that situation, people are actually hurting others. And we can, God forbid, move in that direction too.
I think I'm next. So Susan asked a question a while ago, and I didn't feel like it was answered, and I think it's really important, which is, when does speech become action? When does speech become violence? Because you said the Supreme Court no longer considers crying fire in a crowded theater to be illegal, although pulling a fire alarm is. So it's not, they're the same action, but one of them used words. So we know that you can go to jail for words. If you say to someone, let's blow up a bridge, here's where we'll get the weapons, here's where we'll do this, you can go to jail for many, many years, as some Occupy activists from Ohio who just said yes when someone else said to them, let's burn up a bridge, found out. And to get more direct, if you said, hey, let's go kill the Arabs down the street, because that's what French people would say. They wouldn't say Muslims, they'd say Arabs. And they did, and it was brought up in court that you'd said that, you might go to jail. But is just saying, well, I don't really trust Arabs. Okay, that's not violence, right? But then when it's, you know, let's see how angry we can possibly make and insulted we can make Arabs feel by mocking what they love most dearly and hold most sacred, how close are you getting to violence, right? And, you know, there was a woman who pushed a guy off the edge of the subway a year or two ago because she said she'd been fantasizing for a long time about killing Muslims in New York. She was probably one of those 30% of people who had changed their mind from the week after 9/11 to 2 years ago because of all the propaganda, all the statements and ideas, quote unquote, that built up to violence. So I don't think it's an easy question. I don't think you can say, well, the Supreme Court says so as an answer. There's a spectrum from speech as these things that the Supreme Court justices say it is, an exchange of ideas, to speech as death, to speech as murder.
Start here and then go to you.
Okay, so this is a beautiful question and a very important question. So think, and I'll use my public health hat right now for a second. If you look at a public health, everything is a bell-shaped curve. So let's look at the opinions and the perceptions and perspectives of people as a bell-shaped curve. We have people on one extreme and the people on the other extreme. Whenever there's a bad incident or something that happens, the curve starts to move this way. And suddenly the people who are in the fringes, who are actually on the opinions on the extreme side, the number of people on the extreme side starts to increase suddenly. So when they turn one of the television channels on, in which most of the time in such a situation of some bad thing that happens on Fox News, I'll go ahead and say, they would actually go ahead and say, go kill the Muslims. And this is not the first time that has happened. They actually have said that on their television to go ahead and do that. Now suddenly, that fringe, that group that is increasing, a small segment of them, and then a few days later, somebody actually stabbed a taxi driver. And then in a couple of years ago, the Sikh community, who actually wear turbans, were mistaken for being Muslims, and somebody went to the Gurdwara and then murdered the people. And these people, when you ask them what was the cause of it, they will tell you it was hate speech that resulted in that. So if you don't want the statistics, talk to the cases, and they will tell you, and words can kill. And talk to the children who are bullied, who have tried to kill themselves. Words can kill, words can hurt, and age is not a restriction. Except we don't like bullying, but suddenly on day when you are no longer in school, you turn the switch on and the whole society bullies.
Paradoxically, I don't think the solution is fewer words, but more words.
Yeah, precisely.
To flood the marketplace of ideas with more reasonable, sane, diverse ideas, which would expose a statement, go kill Muslims, as being a fringe idea on the extreme filled with hate, not a part of serious, respected discourse. So I think we need to have more speech. And the problem in our society, frankly, and it's the point I'm trying to make about the media, is we don't have enough speech. We don't have enough perspectives represented.
Well, I'll try to respond to that, but the way we get our answer about legal speech is from the Supreme Court. That's who decides whether it's legal or not. In America. So when Ku Klux Klan members want to burn a cross and people want to stop them, you can't. It's protected speech. Okay, right. Here's the wording from the Supreme Court. It needs to be imminent lawless action. All right. Let me just find it here. Recent cases had forbidden convictions against persons who merely advocated the moral propriety or necessity of using violence to overthrow the government, merely advocated violence against the government. It must appear that the speaker intended to produce imminent lawless action and that violence was likely to result from the speech. That's our answer. That's our answer. You cannot say things that will produce imminent violence.
So burning a cross on someone's
Burning a
front
cross,
lawn is not going to cause
right.
imminent danger.
That's burning a cross is acceptable speech.
Can you just repeat that phrase, imminent?
Imminent lawless action. Right.
Unless you're
Allowing-
the president ordering drone strikes.
Allowing Nazis to march through your town who want to get rid of all the Jews. That's accepted speech in this country.
But the problem is that the Ku Klux Klan is still existent, whereas groups that are comparable, like the Black Panther Party, have been obliterated. So what's going on here? And why is it Ku Klux Klan anyway? Why is there a K in the Klan? I mean, what idiocy, you know? So that you can't say that, oh well, this is free speech, because it just looks like they got away with it by the power structure that supported them, whereas the people that the power structure aren't supporting disappear.
The Ku Klux Klanners who killed civil rights workers were in prison.
Not all of them, no. Not all of them, and you have. I want to let Dr. Anwar
Actually,
speak.
I just want to, and I know I want to hear what people are saying as well. For the Supreme Court, and I say that with a lot of respect. Actually, in the past, the Supreme Court, during the time when the Japanese were interned and put in internment camps, the Supreme Court supported that decision. And the Supreme Court also says that money is one way of free speech. Yes. So, and I say that with respect, but Supreme Court, in my opinion, can make decisions which I may personally, as an individual, not agree with.
Would you like to go? Hang on. CTN is filming, so we'd like you to speak into the microphone.
With all due respect to the United States Supreme Court, I think the test on free speech is very speculative, because in most cases nobody brings an action to shut down the speech. And even if they do, who can really judge what that impact of speech is going to be?
Could you say that again? Nobody brings an action to shut down the speech?
Well, in many cases,
Okay.
there's speech, and no one's in a position to really bring a lawsuit to try to shut it down. So that's one problem. The other problem is, even if you do bring a legal action, let's say you have the resources to do that, it's very speculative what the impact of that challenge speech is going to be. Nobody really knows whether the Ku Klux Klan march is going to lead to some atrocities. There's just no way of knowing. It's a guess. And that's really very, very risky in my mind.
If you ban a Ku Klux Klan march thinking there might be violence, then you can ban an anti-war march because that might be violent. The concept is if you allow opinions out, if you allow speech, if you allow marches, there will be a marketplace of ideas and the truth will emerge.
And
Can I just follow up?
sure, and then pass it to your right.
But if the organization that is bringing the march has a history of violence, has advocated violence, then why should it be allowed? I think it's very different when you're dealing with the Ku Klux Klan than when you're dealing with a peace march, an anti-war march, or something relating to, an issue that hasn't had a history of violence.
We allow Westboro Baptist Church, which is neither Baptist nor a church, to picket funerals. And when the young man, soldier, who was killed, his father, I think it was in Maryland, and forgive me if I misremember this, he petitioned that they not be allowed, and the court said they can. and I find them disgusting. And in a world where I ran the world, they wouldn't get any posters. But that's freedom of speech, and it's really uncomfortable. If you'd like to talk, and then we can go to Dr. Menzel.
I was in Paris during the Charlie Hebdo massacre, and it was, in a way, a wake-up call for me to see how the French have maybe a different attitude from our own here in the United States, because I took a look at the special issue of Charlie Hebdo, which they published a few days later, and frankly, I was shocked. Shocked by what I saw, some of those cartoons, because they struck me as just gratuitously insulting to Islam. And I wondered, you know, I would have defined some of those cartoons as hate speech. In other words, why wait until there's some you know, violent response to this? Why do it in the first place? You know, like, I can accept Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, and he can insult Fox News all he likes. But what I was seeing in some of these cartoons was pretty shocking, and I just wondered, like, what was the point of this? Are they defending free speech? And then, of course, a few days later, Dieudonné, I forget his full name, the comedian, who said, "Je suis Koulibaly," and I think he was arrested, if I recall.
He was.
And that struck me as extremely contradictory. I mean, you have all these people marching for Charlie Hebdo, and yet he can't say "Je suis Koulibaly," because of course when they say these things like that with a slogan, a soundbite, it's representative of a whole raft of opinion. It didn't necessarily mean that Dieudonné was for terrorist acts which kill innocent people. That's not necessarily what he meant, but nevertheless he was shut up. He was about it. So I don't think the French have got, they don't seem to have sorted out what they really mean by, you know, what is hate speech and what is freedom of speech and so on and so forth. But I don't know if any of you have anything to say or comment about that.
This is the point, is that when you have the extremes by sensational media, you know, just spouting out one version of what needs to be heard, you hear it in Fox News, for example, this extreme right-wing approach that you're either Muslim or you're a good American. You know, and I teach high school youth, and this is what I hear from them. They're being alienated by this kind of extremism. And I agree with Chris. What we need is more free speech, but responsible free speech, where other opinions are also voiced in an audience like this. But it won't, guarantee you, they're not here. You know, we won't hear this on the main news channels because they don't find this newsworthy. And so we have a real crisis, at least from the Muslim community and from the leadership of the Muslims, is that we want our youth to feel enfranchised, that we want them to have a positive American Islamic identity. And this is at crisis level at the moment. If the news is feeding you that you're either a good Muslim or you're a good American, then what happens to them? They have to be forced to choose. And, you know, in France, when you have these dichotomies of free speech allowed in one case and not in another case, what's happening is that some of our youth are going and joining ISIS. And this is a crisis for the Muslim community because we don't want our youth to get alienated to the extent that they become lone wolves and go join crazy organizations because they don't feel enfranchised in America or in Europe. I mean, this is serious. This is really serious, and there has to be not just, you know, what the law allows, but what morally is the right thing to do. And we need to have more voices. We need to have more voices in the channels that matter, because what's happening in the Arab world is probably the opposite. I haven't heard the Arab channels, but it's probably sensational news the other way around. And what are we building? A society that's bent on you're hating each other. This is the result, and we can't afford this. We have to take the higher ground and say enough is enough.
Perfect. If we go back in the corner.
I went to the program on this topic at Charter Oak about a week and a half ago, and what you were just saying about the unbalance was described in that Charlie Hebdo published a picture using the prophet being shot through and the Quran being an ineffectual shield. But when a youth did a similar picture and showing a cartoonist with Charlie Hebdo being an ineffectual shield, he was arrested and is threatened with 20 years of imprisonment for offense. And we at that program couldn't figure out what the difference was. But then what struck me, and when you all were talking of censorship, it reminded me of at least one of the cartoonists on the panel there said that when incidents like this happen and when other threatening incidents have occurred, then the cartoonists and others in the media start thinking, should I report that? Should I draw that? Should I change it so that I will be safe? And they have to make decisions. And the editor of Charlie Hebdo was on record before he was killed as saying, I have nothing, I have no wife, I have no children, I can do this because I have nothing to lose. And I've seen phrases about, if you have nothing to lose, then you have all the freedom. But is the self-censorship that goes on in reaction to incidents like this almost more dangerous than overt censorship because we don't know that it's happening, as opposed to overt censorship? We know what the picture was that the first selectman said had to be taken out of the library, and we can give the possibility that the picture can be displayed some other location and people can still see it. But if the artist had decided never to make that picture, would we know that that self-repression had occurred, and isn't that more dangerous?
I don't mind attempting an answer at that. I don't think we should censor in any way. I think what Chris and I are advocating is that we have those voices out there, but we have a constructive debate on, is this helpful or is this not? Is this causing more damage or is it not? Rather than waiting and alienating a minority to the extent that they resort to the kind of, you insult my mother and I'll punch you, the Pope's model of, human reaction, rather than ethical and moral and religious teachings to just calm down. This should be debated. And I don't see that. I don't see that in the media. I don't see the debate. I think this is the big question, is how do we have more free speech so that we can have that balanced view of exactly what's going on, and the dichotomy is brought out, that there is this dichotomy where it's allowed in the case of you attacking the Prophet but not allowed in the case of you attacking Charlie Hebdo.
It goes back to the who's on the margins, and do we keep the people on the margins on the margins? That's why one would be allowed and the other wouldn't be, I think.
Real quick, I gotta jump in.
He's got to jump in.
Another example that I like to
hang on.
to mention is the movie, the now notorious movie, The Interview. Now, it's okay to assassinate Kim Jong-un, right? But what if that was Queen Elizabeth? What would the reaction be?
I'm Irish. I say offer.
Right. See? What if it was Prince William? What if it was anybody else? It's just selective sometimes. The outrage is selective. It's like, oh, well, we can do that to Kim Jong-un, but, and that's no problem. But if it was this person, then it's different. So there's different instances. And the Supreme Court, I liken to the scientific community. A theory is a theory until it's disproven. And I believe it's the same with the Supreme Court. They have laws on the books, but until it's taken down or proven that it's unconstitutional, then it's legal until it's not legal.
Absolutely, and that's our system. For 200 years, the Supreme Court said there does not have to be integration. And finally, in 1952, they said there does have to be integration.
So that shows how boneheaded the establishment is. And then you can say, wow, well, America is that way. It's like everything is illegal unless it's proven legal. But then on the other side of the planet, everything is legal until it's proven illegal. So it's just a total different spectrum of thought that dictates the society.
That's why I went back to the Song of Roland in the year 778. There's a history to this. We weren't all born equal back in 778 and even in 1952. There's a history, and it's the democracies that are allowing the growth of a majority of the people. There's a question here.
I think we have time for one more. So
okay, well,
it's you.
We've been spending a lot of time on the national and the Supreme Court and the broadcast news media. A lot of it's really out of our reach. We're not going to impact it immediately in this room, but I want to bring it very local in the ways that I've seen recently free speech made illegal, particularly with minority organizations and youth minorities. Recently, a young man was arrested in Heaven Skate Park while trying to mediate disagreement with an officer. I think they called it inciting a riot, similar to a resisting arrest. It's very often used to censor free speech, and it comes from a position of power and privilege. So that's just something to be aware of. The young man now has to, defend his good name against a very serious charge, instead of having a well-trained officer deal with it in a way that's not inflammatory. And I've also seen very peaceful, amazing marches, diverse marches in Hartford, receiving citations for using bullhorns, and trying to say very amazing, peaceful things that are going to change our city for the better. And for some reason, our establishment and the way we choose to enforce some laws censor very important free speech in our city. And that's local and actionable.
That's Bishop John Selders.
Here's local. So the Citizens United was brought up, and money is speech. In Hartford, begging is illegal. That's not protected speech. So, who's in power and who isn't?
I think we could probably talk all night, but I'm told we have to leave. They closed the building. So I want to thank our panelists, Chris Allen Dussault. Thank you so much, Chris. Dr. Reza Mansour, Jim Smith, and Dr. Saud Anwar. And thank you all very much for coming. Pay attention to the next event. Is it already on the books, or you'll just let us know? We'll let you know. We'll let you know. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Very good.